What's up, guys, and welcome to Eccentric Entertainment. Today we're going to be talking about video games, and by video games I mean specifically the brand new game that the trailer just dropped for, Battlefield 1. So as we saw from the trailer, Battlefield 1 takes place during World War I, a time period that not many shooter games have gone to before, and since not very many games have gone there before, and it hasn't really been seen that much, especially by bigger games like Battlefield. I figured that I'd go and talk about kind of the weapons, the vehicles, and the maps, kind of places where they would have that the game will have, and the type of things the game will have during this era. So we already got some very non-specific details from the developers. They were talking about how there's going to be horses, and we can see this in the trailer too. There's horses, a lot of hand-to-hand combat, and there's all this stuff. As a lot of you probably know, World War I was the dawn of the machine gun. It's the first major war where they actually used a machine gun, first war where they actually used airplanes in combat, so we'll have dogfights. The first introduction to the tank, and of course it's famous for the trench warfare, so we'll probably be seeing a decent amount of trench warfare because that's kind of more of the main focus of the war between Germans and France and Great Britain right there. So let's get going. First I'm going to be talking about the vehicles. The type of vehicles that we'll have is obviously tanks. Back in this era, the tanks were slow. I don't know if they'll necessarily do that in the game, but the tanks were slow. The tanks didn't have much fuel. I assume they won't really have that in the game because it would kind of suck if you drive for a while and then they kind of break down. The tanks would break down a lot, and there was heavier tanks where they would have more armor on them, obviously, and then there's light tanks that would move faster, maybe have a machine gun on it, while the bigger ones would have cannons, and sometimes they'd have no guns, so it's just a transport thing and just a way to get over the trenches, because during World War I, they'd use the tanks to break through the lines, get over the trenches, and then probably just release a bunch of guys into the trenches to try to take out as many as possible. Another thing they would have is they'd have planes, obviously. They'd have the dogfighter planes, the scout biplanes, where if they do it based on World War I, it's usually there's single pilot planes where there's just one pilot and there's a little trigger underneath and it has a gun on the front or two guns and it shoots just forward. There's also a two pilot plane where there's a gunner also in the back and the pilot also has machine guns in the front. And then there's bomber planes where they hold up. This is how they actually did it. They had a bunch of bombs in the cockpit with them, and the guy in the back would just drop them out of the plane. I don't know if that's how they'll do it, but I mean, well, I guess we'll figure it out. There'll also be trucks. Obviously, there's trucks to just drive around. I don't know if they'll have guns on them or what. There'll be that weird train thing that we saw in the trailer also. It looks like it's a train with a bunch of guns on it, and then there'll be horse riding, which will be a little bit interesting. Also, if we get into any water things, we'll see some battleships and that kind of stuff. Maybe we'll see some U-boats because that's when the Germans introduced the U-boats, and yeah, we'll see some stuff going on with that. Also, the developers did say about the tanks is that every different army had different kind of tanks back then, so the controls for every single tank will be different for every single army. So I assume the Germans had the most advanced tanks back then. Theirs will probably be the more heavy tanks where they're beefier and they have better weapons, while other countries' tanks might be the light tanks where they kind of are quicker and they have machine guns instead of big cannon guns. And there's also blimps, or the Zeppelin that it's called. Back in the days they actually had war blimps, which is kind of funny to think about, but I don't know if you'll be able to fly them or not. I guess we'll figure out when we get there. For the maps, let's just do the maps before we get to the weapons. We'll have France, which would be the Western Front, the trenches, the muddy, the no man's land. I assume there's going to be a lot of artillery at this one. I don't know if they'll do it where the teams get to sit back and just shoot artillery at each other, or like artillery will just drop randomly throughout the game. That'll be an interesting thing to figure out when we get there. Another place we'll be fighting is in the forests of Belgium. It's I don't know, it's probably just wide open, just forest. Well, not wide open if it's forest. That'll be interesting landscape to fight in for Battlefield. Usually Battlefield games are just wide open. There are some trees, there's some buildings, but most of the time it's just open warfare. Another place will be Saudi Arabia. It'll be a desert map, open. This will be more open, lots of sand. This is where the horses will come in, the horse soldiers with swords and stuff, and that will get intense. And then also we'll have the Italian Alps. This is part of the game. It looks really nice. It's big mountains. That'll be really interesting to see how that plays out in the game. So that'll be cool. Now let's move on to the weapons, the big part of the game that everybody wants to know about. The weapons we'll have by the developers, what they said is that they want to focus a lot on hand-to-hand combat. That's a big thing they want to have into this a lot, because World War I there's a lot of hand-to-hand combat. So there'll be the trench shovels, knives, swords, bayonets on the rifles and stuff. There'll be for guns, we'll have shotguns, trench guns. That's a big one that they'll probably have. It'll be powerful close range guns, and it'll be good for the hand-to-hand combat. So if you get close enough, you'll have a shotgun or you'll have a freaking trench shovel, just wreck kids. And they also showed that for melee weapons, they showed that like spiked club thing, so that might get interesting. Also, there'll be machine guns. So some of these will be stationary. I assume they'll be mounted, like they had mostly in World War I, where you'd mount them on a thing and you'd have to pour water on them to cool them, so you just mow people down. And I also assume that some of them, they'll basically be kind of similar guns, but you'll like detach them. You won't have to detach them, but they'll basically be a detached gun like that. It'll be pretty big. It'll be more like a light machine gun than an assault rifle, so we'll have to get a little used to that. Rifles. The rifles back then, a lot of them were probably bolt action, but I assume they had semi-auto. I haven't really looked it up about the rifles, but I assume most of them were bolt action. But obviously this game, bolt action guns would freaking suck, so I assume there'll be a lot of semi-auto rifles, and you'll get to attach the bayonets to it to go into that hand-to-hand combat, especially in the trenches. That will be intense hand-to-hand combat, and that'll be really cool. And like we saw from the trailer, flamethrowers. That's going to be fun. There's going to be a lot of freaking flamethrowers, people shooting flames everywhere, and especially in the trenches, it's going to get awesome. It's going to get crazy in there, and this game looks like it's going to be fun. So, talking about the weapons, I want to get more in detail with it here and kind of show you pictures on the screen of the weapons that potentially could be based on the different weapons they actually used in World War I. I assume they'd want to stick closely to the historical aspects of it, at least a little bit. So I'm going to pull up some weapons and we're going to see if these are the ones that they may potentially use. Kind of going to go by the different classes and kind of see, show you guys what kind of guns they used back then and the potential guns that we could get in the game. Okay, first for pistols, there is going to be, well, it was actually on the cover of the trailer and the game, I think, the Mauser C96. Another pistol would be the M1911, and all different kinds of revolvers, and yeah, just revolvers were what most of them used back then, but there was also guns like M1911s and Mausers and that kind of stuff. Into the rifles, we're probably going to see some Arisakas. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Arisaka. I don't know. Yeah, we're going to probably see some of those. Springfields, Ewers, Berthier Carbine, and this one would be a game changer. The BAR, the Browning Automatic Rifle. if you ever played World at War, it was the BIR in that game. So it's like one of the automatic rifles. So it was like one of the first automatic rifles, I believe. There was another one, a British one, that was actually the first, I believe. But this one's actually one that it's a lighter rifle, not a light machine gun, and you can and it's fully auto. So that'd be a good one they could have in it. And there'll be shotguns most likely, because in the trenches there's shotguns, trench guns. They'll have Remingtons, which are mostly pump action guns, Winchesters, multiple versions of Winchesters. The Remington Model 10 was the big one that was used, and the Browning Auto 5 rifle. It was a semi-automatic rifle instead of a pump shotgun. So you can kind of just wreck some kids in the trenches with that. That would be interesting. Then moving on, the Germans were one of the only countries who actually had this, but there was submachine guns. The MP-18 was the one the Germans had, so that would be pretty good to have in the trenches, some submachine guns. And I assume the other countries kind of made their own submachine guns also, but they probably weren't as good as the Germans, so they didn't use them as much. And I assume for Battlefield, if they want a submachine gun class of weapons, they're going to make some up or make up ones that, or use ones that weren't widely used in the war. And then finally, the big one is machine guns. So these are mounted and unmounted. You have the Browning 1917. This one's a big one. This one, I believe they mounted that one also, and it was picked up. The Vickers machine gun. This one was only mounted because it was water cooled, so after you shot too much and overheated, you had to pour water on it or else it wouldn't be able to shoot. And then finally you have the Lewis gun. This one had that bipod, so it was mostly mounted on the ground, I assume in the trenches, but you could probably pick it up and hip fire that thing if you really wanted to. And I assume that's what they're going to do in the game, and we can only wait till that happens. Then obviously there'll be plenty of different kinds of grenades. There'll be mines, most likely, because there was a lot of mines in there. And there'll be mustard gas and chlorine gas, I assume. Which will be cool to get all that stuff. Maybe some classes, there'll be like gas masks that you have to put on when the gas comes, and that would be cool. That would be cool. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have for today. It's my predictions on what I think the guns and the vehicles and all that stuff will be in the new upcoming game, Battlefield 1. Hopefully it's good. It looks good. It looks awesome. I'm really excited to play in this time period. It'll be a cool and a refreshing first-person shooter place to go into. And hopefully it's freaking great. Make sure to like if you like, favorite if you fave, subscribe to be updated on future gaming news and predictions like this. I do reviews on Game of Thrones and Supernatural throughout the weeks, and I talk about movies and TV shows and all that stuff also. So that's all I have. Subscribe. See y'all later.